you are being recorded. So this meeting, the recording of this meeting will be posted to our website. Just know that. We'll also be creating a detailed written summary to accompany the recording, a little easier to read than having to watch 2 hours. So yes, any other questions about why we're here or what we're going to do before I dive in? Okay, let's dive in. Okay, so what we're doing here is getting your comments and answering your questions specific to this Tier 3 concept that the legislature enacted as a part of the Act 250 Reform Bill, Act 181, back in 2024. This is the second of 4 public engagement sessions. We were encouraged to try to get out of Chittenden County in particular and get to all parts of the state. Our sort of introductory public meeting on this was back in May, before we really had started work, and that was in Essex. So this is our second meeting. We were in Morrisville last night. We'll be in Newport next week and Windsor. And all 4 of these meetings are hybrid. So if we run out of time tonight and there was something you really wanted to say and you didn't get a chance to say it, I don't think that'll happen, but if it does, you're welcome to attend any of the other 2 meetings that are happening next week from the comfort of your couch rather than driving to Newport. So got to start with what Act 250 is, but I'm curious, just in the room at least, with a show of hands, how many people feel like they know Act 250 pretty well? Hey, that's most of you. So I'm going to give very surface level introduction to what Act 250 is, and then move on to what we're really here for tonight. So Act 250 is Vermont's statewide development review program and permitting system. Most of you probably know that the bulk of land use regulation in Vermont happens at the local level, at the municipal level. So you want to build something, you go get a zoning permit. You want to subdivide your land, maybe you got to go get a subdivision permit from your local planning commission or your development review board. But at the statewide level, there is another separate development review program, and that's Act 250. And it was enacted over 50 years ago, and so it's been around for a very long time. And when the reform bill, Act 181, was passed a couple of years ago, the purpose was sort of updated, and it's what's up on the screen right now. And Act 250 really is meant to accomplish 2 aims. One is to allow for economic development so that we have vibrant communities and places for people to work and recreate and all of that. But at the same time, it's designed to make sure that development helps make sure that Vermont stays Vermont, particularly the natural resources that really distinguish us from other states, right? This is not the Rust Belt in Ohio. We are not Southern New Jersey or Greater Boston. Vermont has a different feel, a different function, and Act 250 is all about trying to preserve that while allowing for responsible growth. So the idea is to make sure that growth can happen, but not at the expense of our landscape. Act 250 is a citizen-based review process. So as I mentioned, just like at the local level, where there might be a planning commission or a development review board that's going to sit and hear an application for development at the town level, there's a very similar board that does that for the Act 250 program, and that is our district commissions. There are 9 of them across the state. They're volunteers, they're appointed by the governor, and they review actual applications and issue decisions. Most people think of Act 250 as I submit an application, I get scheduled for a hearing, there's a big to-do, maybe there's a site visit, and then I wait for a written decision from these district commissions. In fact, most Act 250 permits do not go through that process. Act 250 permitting is divided up into administrative amendments where you have a permit and you need to make a minor change, and those typically are approved by our district coordinators, our staff. without any review by the district commissions. Then there are minor projects, which is the vast majority of Act 250 permits where an application is filed. A district coordinator works with the commission to draft an approval, and that draft approval is circulated to interested parties and adjacent landowners to say, we don't think this needs a hearing. We plan to approve it. Here's the draft approval. If you think we need to convene a hearing, let us know and we will, but otherwise we're just going to approve this thing. And those are the minor permit applications and approvals, which is the bulk of what Act 250 permitting is. And then there are the major projects. Those are the ones that grab more of the headlines. And yes, those involve public hearings and sometimes neighbor commentary and site visits so that the commission can understand what the project looks like. So it is citizen-based, and that's an important piece to the how Act 250 has worked over the years. It's meant to be accessible to the public. It's meant to give people an opportunity to comment. It's different from other statewide permitting programs. So, for example, the Agency of Natural Resources issues thousands of permits every year in Vermont for things like a new septic system or potential impact to a wetland or a wetland buffer or erosion control and stormwater runoff for a construction site. Most of those A&R permits are administrative permits. There's no opportunity for a public hearing. There's no way for the public to sort of be involved in those permit decisions. Act 250 was designed to be different in that respect. The review is based on 10 basic criteria, and there are several sub-criteria within each, so it's a bit more than just 10, but these are the 10 basic criteria. And what I want to get across with this slide is not the specifics of each one, but just to make sure everybody understands that Act 250 is a comprehensive review process. It's not about whether a leach field meets the state's water wastewater permitting design standards. It dives into things like erosion control, but also impact on the local school system. Is a project going to overwhelm a municipality's ability to educate its kids, to maintain its roads, and the like? So it's citizen-based. It's also a comprehensive review process. The jurisdiction of Act 250 over the last 50 years has varied a bit, but it's very much been focused on large projects. That was the core of Act 250 when it was initiated. And so it typically involves projects of 10 or more housing units. Depending on the community it's in, it can trigger the need for a permit when you have subdivision of 6 or 10 or more lots. It is jurisdictional when it's a commercial development on a parcel of a certain size, once again, depending on the community in question and whether they have local zoning. And it covers most development above 2,500 feet. So that's the Act 250 jurisdiction that we are all used to. That's the Act 250 jurisdiction we've been working with for 50 years. So in 2024, as I mentioned, the legislature passed Act 181, which changed that jurisdiction. And so the changes from that statute are going to be phased in over a number of years. But from a jurisdictional standpoint, what kinds of projects are going to need an Act 250 permit? There were two big changes, and they're coming into effect over the next year and a half. One is a new road construction jurisdictional provision, which says that if you're going to build a new road of more than 800 feet, that project is going to need an Act 250 permit. So that's a significant change. That provision used to be in the Act 250 rules long ago. We haven't had it for about 20 years, but for the first part of Act 250's history here in Vermont, that was a jurisdictional threshold. Went away, now it's back. The other jurisdictional change has to do with the tier areas, which is what I'll describe in a moment. This is a new concept for jurisdictional triggers in Vermont. It's a way to say that it's not just large projects that matter and trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. It's where the project is. It's location-based jurisdiction. And it has sort of two sides to the coin, or at least two ends of the spectrum. So imagine Vermont painted with, as a map, painted with just 3 colors. And those 3 colors represent tier 1 Tier 2, and Tier 3. In Tier 1 areas, we are going to let go of Act 250, at least in part. These are areas in our downtowns and villages that are well planned. It's where we want growth to happen, and it's where local municipalities have adequate development review processes to make sure that development happens in a logical way. In those Tier 1 areas, we're going to reduce or completely eliminate Act 250 permitting. So that's the first tier. If we jump to the other side of the coin, which is really what we're here to talk about tonight, in Tier 3 areas, we're going to increase Act 250 jurisdiction to cover most development. And the Tier 3 areas are the most critical natural resource areas in the state. Places where before, when it required a 10-lot subdivision to trigger the review through Act 250, places that are so sensitive that perhaps the construction of just a single house deserves some level of scrutiny and review. Those are the Tier 3 areas. Tier 2 areas are everything else. And just so you understand the board's philosophy and the philosophy of the working group that we put together to work on Tier 3 in particular, we see Tier 1 as occupying a relatively small slice of the state. It is the area around our villages and downtowns, areas that are being mapped for future growth. And let's face it, in Vermont, that's a pretty small area. We also envision Tier 3 as a pretty small area, just the most sensitive portions of the state, which leaves us with Tier 2, which is likely going to occupy the vast majority of the state, which again is essentially going to be jurisdiction as we know it today, larger projects, with the addition of this road construction provision. So I'm going to jump into Tier 3. Again, I told you that Tier 3 are meant to be areas that are the most critical natural resources. The legislature gave our board the responsibility to figure out what those resources should be. But the 6 areas on the left column of this slide are the areas that the legislature said, you must at least consider these areas. You don't need to include them as Tier 3, but if you don't, you have to tell us why, because we think that they deserve consideration. So those first 6 is what we started with. And then the remaining items you see up there are just other somewhat obvious natural resource areas that we wanted to consider. So then the question is, we have to pick some of these, and we did, as you can see from the highlighted ones on this slide. But who's the we in that process? As a part of Act 181, we were required to establish a working group of experts from a variety of fields, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the realtors in the state, from the Ski Areas Association, from the Agency of Natural Resources, both sort of Fish and Wildlife Department, Forest Parks and Recreation, water quality, experts from within various divisions within ANR, as well as ecologists and other representatives. It's about 25 people on our working group. You can see the list on our Tier 3 website if you want to better understand who those folks are. And so what we've been doing since May is working with that group to understand which of these resources deserve consideration and to try to winnow it down. We've also been talking about what should the draft rule look like, and we have that up on the Tier 3 webpage now for you to take a look at when you're ready. So that working group has been informing the process. The board has been taking that feedback to try to shape something that is at least presentable to all of you. And that's the stage that we're in right now, is to talk about what we've come up with, even though we're still very much in the middle of drafting. So these highlighted resource areas are the ones we selected. There are reasons why we did not select other ones, and these are some examples. River corridors is a really good one, because in the same year that the legislature enacted Act 250 reform through Act 181, they also passed the Flood Safety Act, which requires that the Agency of Natural Resources stand up a very specific permitting program for anytime there's development in a sensitive river corridor area. And it was, even though it was indicated as a resource we should consider for Tier 3, both the working group and our board felt like there's no need for Act 250 to duplicate permitting processes. So The fact that there will be a permit process for river corridor areas meant that we didn't need to include it as a tier 3 area. Rare, threatened, and endangered species, for me as a former wildlife person, that I came in thinking, well, of course we're going to include those. Those are the sensitive critters. We ought to understand where they are. Turns out there's already a law in the books that prevents taking of those critters, and maybe more importantly, we just don't know where they all are, and we don't have good mapping for the habitat that supports those rare, threatened, endangered species. And one of the criteria that we outlined in selecting these resources was that there had to be reasonable statewide mapping of the resource. We had to have a decent idea of where the resource was. We couldn't say that's an important resource and we have a great idea of where it is in Orleans County because there was a special study there, but we really have no idea where it is around the rest of the state. And rare, threatened, endangered species are one of those resources that we just don't have complete mapping for yet. So interior forest blocks was a resource area that we did not include for a couple of reasons. And it speaks to another criteria that we used, and that was if the resource area represents a huge percentage of the state's land area, then we need to do more. We need to focus in on where the most sensitive portions of those areas are so that we're not requiring 60% of Vermont to get an Act 250 permit to do development on their property. So those were some of the reasons that we eliminated a whole host of resource areas and focused on the 3 that you see here. So significant natural communities, headwater stream areas, and habitat connectors. And I'll walk you through each of those. So significant natural communities are mapped by Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Every natural area in Vermont is part of a natural community. It's just a way to assign a type to that pine forest that you see there, or that upper elevation sort of alpine zone that you might see on the top of Mount Abraham or something like that. So every place is of a particular natural community type. But what Vermont Fish and Wildlife does is they actually map the most significant examples of those, and then they categorize them in their rarity. And so for the purposes of Tier 3, we felt that understanding where the rarest significant natural communities were was reasonable for a Tier 3 resource. And so we've included just the very rare and the rare types. Further, those significant natural communities include both wetland types and upland types. And because wetlands are very well protected in this state already with permitting through the Agency of Natural Resources, we eliminated all of the wetland significant natural communities and focused on just those that don't have any protection today. These areas are actual on the ground, boots on the ground mapping. Many of them are on public land, but some are also on private land, where Fish and Wildlife has worked with willing landowners over the years to identify these most rare and significant natural areas. Headwater stream areas is another one that's on our list. When we initially started mapping this one, I thought Vermont's had massive flooding the last few years. These upper reaches, that's what a headwater stream is. It's sort of the upper area where streams begin. I figured these are sensitive areas. Like, we got to make sure that we don't have willy-nilly development in those areas that just results in downstream effects. Seems like an easy thing to include. Turns out that the common definition of a headwater stream area includes almost 90% of the state. That doesn't work for a Tier 3 area, at least in our conception of it. So we wanted to refine that down and focus on just the most sensitive areas within those. And what we did was we said, let's intersect that big area and just highlight places that have the steepest slopes, 35% or greater, and then marry those areas with just the areas that have soils that don't infiltrate water. So poorly drained soils that when we have a big storm, water just runs right off of them. It doesn't soak in. And let's use Newton's law and assume that if you're a bit higher up in elevation, gravity is going to do a little more damage as that water runs downhill. Let's focus on the higher elevation areas as well. So we added all those screens together, and we brought our mapping of those headwater stream areas, the most sensitive portions, from 90% of the state down to about 2% of the state. We did the same with habitat connectors. Vermont Fish and Wildlife has done a really good job of mapping important natural resources around the state through a program called Vermont Conservation Design. And through that program, they've used high resolution remote sensing to understand where all of the forested areas are in Vermont, and then prioritize which portions of those forested areas help contribute to a network that allows plants and animals to move across the landscape, not just within Vermont, but from the Adirondacks through Vermont into the White Mountains and into Quebec, connecting the entire northern forest. And so the map you see on your left indicates where those priority connectivity blocks of forests are mapped. The orange are the highest priority connectivity blocks. They're the ones that create sort of the backbone of that connection across and throughout the state. The yellow areas are priority, but not of the highest priority. So still of some importance, but not as critical. So again, this was over 60% of the state. Seemed like a decent way to get after habitat connectivity. Not going to work for a tier 3 designation, at least the way we conceived it. So we worked with Fish and Wildlife to try to identify where are those blocks broken. And roads is where those blocks are broken. So we identified just the orange areas, just the highest priority connectivity blocks. And we looked at where do we have roads bisecting those blocks, and where within those road segments do we have good forested habitat on either side of the road, such that species can actually move, as opposed to I've got a parking lot on one side and my house on the other side, and that's not really a spot that wildlife are going to get across that road. So we combined this road segment analysis with the highest priority connectivity blocks, and we came up with some refined mapping that you see on the right side, which is about 6% of Vermont, depending on the buffer we use.
What percent?
6%. Yep. And I'll give you more details about how we did the habitat connectors and what some refinements we're making in a couple of slides, because it's a little confusing, or complicated, but I can explain it to you. What I want to note here is on the lower right of the slide. It's great to try to make sure that connectors along roads retain their function and make sure that development is properly designed to allow that to happen. But those connectors don't really do anything if the large chunks of forest that they lead to don't exist anymore. So a lot of folks at the front end were like, well, how are those areas being considered? And the answer is this road construction jurisdictional provision that the legislature wrote into the reform. So because development that involves new roads of more than 800 feet are going to be jurisdictional and require an Act 250 permit, those interior forest areas will likely be going through Act 250 review if a developer proposes a long road that punches into that interior forest. So for tier 3, we felt like we could focus on just the road areas and find where the most important connectivity is, understanding that those large interior blocks, to the extent that there's development proposed, will likely be an Act 250 review for that other jurisdictional trigger. So again, back to tier 3, we're focusing on the most sensitive areas. This is the current map, and subject to change, because that's what tonight is all about, to hear comments and questions from you and help us refine the mapping as well as the rules. But we're looking at a total tier 3 area between 4.5 and 8.8% of the land area. You can see in each of the 3 categories, what that represents. The habitat connectors is the real variable, because we are at this point showing 2 options. One where we would have this jurisdictional trigger extend 800 feet from the roads within these key connector areas, kind of tied to that road rule I was mentioning before. We're also considering a 2,000 foot, a much larger buffer away from the roads, which is also tied to a provision of that road rule, which says that the combined, it's either 800 feet of new road or a combined total of 2,000 feet of road and new driveway. That would be a jurisdictional trigger under that road rule. So there's some variability there. We need to pick that, but that's where we landed. I do want to note that, especially since we're meeting in Rutland City, that the other precept that we have going into these rules is that we want the tiers to be discrete. So in the tier 1 areas where we're going to get rid of Act 250, or at least limit it in some respects, we don't want tier 3 areas to map on top of them and then somehow be a trigger for the need for an Act 250 permit, when the whole point of the tier 1 area was to say there won't be an Act 250 review there. So what we're proposing to do is to exclude any of the areas that are mapped by the regional planning commissions as suitable for future growth in our downtowns, villages, planned growth areas. And all 11 of the regional plans are being updated over the next year to define those areas. And so we're going to piggyback on that and say those areas, the 4 that are listed here, will not have tier 3 in them. So when you go to our website and look at our map viewer, which if you haven't yet, you're going to do it after this meeting because it's a fun thing to look at. You're going to see where these tier 3 areas are. You're going to be able to zoom into your property, your town, and you're going to see these sort of red crosshatch overlays with around the downtowns and villages. And that's sort of a rough approximation of where we are going to end tier 3 and not have it be able to get into those exclusion areas. So these are the sections of the rule. The rule is available on our tier 3 website. I encourage you to go take a look at it. It's not that long. I'm not going to read it to you or even walk through the sections, but I am going to give you a few highlights and then we can get into your questions. So as I mentioned, we did not select a whole host of important resource areas. We will have to provide an explanation for that. And we will do that in a report that will accompany the rule itself. This tier 3 rule is not a one and done proposition. So we're going to do the best we can. We're going to stand up a rule. But it's my feeling that as mapping improves, as A&R tells us, hey, we've got some updates, we have better information, we will be updating the tier 3 mapping. So imagine the scenario where we do the best we can with the data we have today, and we come up with a map that says, here's a jurisdictional map for tier 3. If you're in these areas, there's going to be some level of Act 250 review. And we put that map here and make it available for everyone. Let's say 2 years from now, A&R has done some amazing mapping. There's much better data for one of these areas, and it's time to update the map. It's only at that time that we will reopen the rules and fix the map, our tier 3 map, based on this better data, in order to ensure that there's a public process like this one, so everybody has an opportunity to understand what's happening, rather than us just sort of updating a map on the fly. Additionally, we understand that statewide mapping and data sources have inherent error in them. And so the rules can contain a site-specific delineation or correction option so that a landowner or a developer can come in and say to one of our district coordinators, hey, this is my project. I need to know if I need an Act 250 permit. P.S. It looks like I'm in a tier 3 area, but that's a parking lot where you map this significant natural community. I don't think that there's really that resource there. And there's a provision in the rule that says if it's an obvious common sense sort of error, you don't need to hire anybody to prove it. You just need to point it out, and the district coordinator can make an accommodation. If it is not obvious and it requires some level of analysis, then we include that option for a landowner to bring in an engineer and say, listen, this is what we've done based on our site work, and it doesn't line up with what your tier 3 mapping is showing. Some other highlights from the rule. This draft anticipates us regulating development only. So as I showed you on earlier slides, subdivision, just the division of into lots without any actual construction, can be a trigger for Act 250, has been in the past if there are enough lots. For the tier 3 rules, we don't want that to happen. We want the jurisdiction to trigger only when the actual construction is proposed, so that if somebody does want to subdivide their land and it happens to have some tier 3 resources on it, you can go ahead and do that subdivision without an Act 250 permit. What we're proposing is that there will be what we call a jurisdictional opinion from our district coordinator that can be recorded in the land records. So the people who buy the lots that you create will have a little bit of an understanding that, hey, there's a tier 3 area here. If you decide to build on it, you might need an Act 250 permit. Furthermore, Act 250 for a long time has very much been about the parcel. So you do a development on your land, and Act 250 permit is required because you met a trigger, and that Act 250 jurisdiction attaches to the overall parcel forever. And anything you want to do anywhere else on the parcel requires an amendment to the Act 250 permit you got. We want to break that for tier 3 areas. We want the Act 250 jurisdiction to attach only to the area where the tier 3 is being impacted. So you proposed a 2-lot subdivision, and you're going to build, and one of your house sites is edging into one of these tier 3 areas. We want the Act 250 jurisdiction to attach to just that portion of that parcel, not the entire parcel. So imagine another example. You've got 40 acres. There's a really steep slope up on the back, 10 acres, and you're proposing some development down by the road. Your development is not in the tier 3 area, but your parcel contains some up on the back portion. We don't want that development to be required to get an Act 250 permit. It's not in the tier 3 area. It doesn't need to trigger Act 250. So it works sort of both ways. You're not in the area, no permit. You are in the area, but maybe in the future you want to do something on another location on your property that's not jurisdictional. It's fine. You don't need to amend a previous Act 250 permit for the tier 3 impact that you had before. Act 250 is all about exemptions. Many of them are written into statute, and we aim to, at least in this draft, and based on the advice of our attorneys, we aim to carry all of those existing exemptions into the tier 3 areas. So just because tier 3 is a new jurisdictional trigger does not mean that farming or logging is suddenly going to require an Act 250 permit. Those uses are exempt from Act 250, and they will remain exempt if they're done in a tier 3 area. Within the tier 3 rules, we also are trying to carve out logical exemptions so as not to capture everything. So, for example, we are not looking to have an Act 250 permit for somebody who wants to put an addition on their house or do maintenance on their existing structure. Let's say you live on a property, some of your property is mapped as tier 3, and your septic system fails. And the only place you can put a new leach field is in the tier 3 portion of your property. We do not want an Act 250 permit to be required to site your replacement wastewater system in that tier 3 area. There's an A&R permit for that, and that's critical. You just need to do it. So this draft includes an exemption for that. We do not want to have Act 250 permits for dog houses. So there's a structure size of 200 square feet. If you're building something below that within a tier 3 area, again, you would be exempt and not need a permit. Furthermore, we're not interested in seeing Act 250 permitting for maintenance or improvements to existing transportation infrastructure. So if you're a property owner and you need to widen your existing road because it wasn't built quite right, maybe you need it to be 18 feet for the fire trucks instead of the 12 feet that it's turned into. We want to make sure that there's an exemption within a set distance away from these existing transportation features so that we don't trip you up. And that includes the installation of utilities within that sort of transportation corridors. And finally, similar with trails, we do not want an Act 250 permit to be required to simply maintain trails on a property. So those are some of the exemptions that we're weaving in. So this is a half-baked cake. The draft rule that you'll see on our website is draft 2. There was a draft 1, but oh my goodness, it wasn't worth you looking at. And that's because I wrote it and it needed a lot of other eyes on it. So they got those eyes, and now we have a better draft 2. But we anticipate at least 2 more drafts. And so please know that this is a work in progress and that your input is going to help us refine it. And that furthermore, I'll get to the timeline for this. There's no deadline. So this is October 22nd, and we have a couple more of these meetings next week. I am not here to tell you that by Halloween, I need your comments or they will not be considered. There is no such deadline. We're going to be working really hard on this right through the end of this year and right into the beginning of next year. So there's plenty of time for us to incorporate your good suggestions and for you to have some time to think about it and even make those good suggestions. So some of the areas that this draft does need additional work on include the habitat connectors. And I'll show you in the next slide what I mean exactly by that. But first of all, we need to select the distance. So we know where these locations are, but we need to know whether that tier 3 area is going to extend 800 feet away from the road, 2,000 feet, or somewhere in between. And we're happy to hear everybody's thoughts on that. We also need to refine the buffers around those roads so we're capturing just where the actual connector is. And I'll show you that in a moment. Furthermore, there are some regionally significant habitat connectors that people know about across the state, and we need to calibrate our mapping to make sure we didn't miss some of those. The one that seems to come up again and again is the Schutzfeld corridor in the Waterbury Stowe area, where there's a critical habitat connection between very large forest blocks that has been largely developed. And so the areas where there's still connectivity are few and precious. Trails is another big one. I heard a lot about this last night in Morrisville. We acknowledge that we need to have a better sense of when new trail construction will trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. This is a bit of an ongoing issue within the Act 250 program for years, but with the introduction of these new Tier 3 areas, many of which are in higher elevation, steep slope areas where new trails might want to go, we need to figure out what the proper level of review is for trails. Happy to hear thoughts on that as well. I talked a little bit about the exclusion areas around downtowns and villages. Those are ongoing through next year, and so we'll be refining those as the regional plans come to fruition. But another element of the statute is that we do municipal and landowner outreach. We need to do more work on that front. This is just the beginning of that effort. And so I'm hopeful that all of you can help us with that as we move forward through the end of the year in getting the word out about this new changed Act 250 in these Tier 3 areas so that people know about it, they have an opportunity to think about it and provide comments. So these habitat connectors, almost done, trust me. This is an example of why we need to do some refining of them. So this is an area in Sheldon, and you can see where the actual connector is. It's a road segment right in the middle of the screen with the arrows on either side. And so right now, just using basic mapping tools, we just buffer that out by 800 feet, subtract areas around existing homes, which are not part of Vermont Fish and Wildlife's Vermont Conservation Design data set. They've already removed those areas from the data set. So we buffer it out, those areas are gone. And then we buffer it out to 2,000 feet, which is in green. And so, the circle gets even bigger. And you can see that the actual connector areas that we want, which the black arrows point to, are captured, but we end up with these overreach areas. So those are where the red arrows are pointing, which really don't connect to that connector and need to be removed. So I think we're going to have a bit of a manual editing task. I think I am going to have a bit of a manual editing task to walk through the state and actually correct this so that it reflects and we're not capturing properties that really don't need to be involved in the Tier 3 areas. And that's, an example of some of the work substantial work that still needs to happen. So this is our timeline. Like I said, we're about in the middle of the process with public engagement. We're going to be going back to our working group in the next month or so to talk about everything that you told us and to try to make the draft better and improve the mapping. We'll continue that work into next year, and we'll be back to talk to folks again in a more formal way in the spring when we have a more polished and finalized draft so we can get input on it and then make additional revisions. The way that rulemaking works is that the legislature gives boards like ours the ability to do it, and then they require that we come back to them and show us the results and make sure it sort of comports with the statutory authority that they sort of transferred to us. So that's what the LCAR review, as it's shown up here, is next summer. That's the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. And ultimately, we're getting all this feedback so that we can walk into that committee room and say, this is the best we could do. And we heard from a lot of Vermonters, and here are some of the issues, but we think this is reasonable and meets the statutory intent. Ultimately, this new jurisdictional framework does not go into effect until December 31st of next year, 2026. So we have quite a long road to run to get to that point and to try to take into consideration feedback. I will mention that the road rule, which is a big deal, but is not tier 3, does go into effect on July 1st. Of 2026. So that provision of for jurisdiction happens a bit sooner. And our board doesn't get to change that rule. It's not something the legislature gave us the power to sort of amend, but we will be providing guidance on that rule, at least our interpretation of that rule in the first part of 2026. So people have 6 months or so to sort of understand how we think that should be viewed. And what that means for folks going forward. Okay, so I have talked enough, and you must have questions, and I can show you maps if you like and get onto our map viewer, but I'm going to stop the share and open it up. And any comment is welcome. So why don't we start in the room, and then we can go online. And again, folks online, just use the raise your hand function. And if you're having trouble with that, just unmute yourself and we'll get to you. So yeah, I'll just start here. Sure. And ground rules, just introduce yourself. It'd be great to hear your name. It'd be great to hear your name each time you speak, because I imagine some folks want to talk more than once. It'll help me get it straight in my head. And we know who's online, and our recording captures all that. It's a little harder in the room. So
procedural question first.
Yes, go ahead, Ray.
Is it possible for you to project the map of the tier 3 areas that you currently have identified? Can you project all of the state of Vermont?
Yes.
Showing tier 3?
Yes. Let me put that back up on screen. Hold on. Not a bad visual to be able to look at while we're talking, that is. Oops. It's an agenda. That's not going to do the trick. Sorry, hold on. Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Perfect. Devin Neary, Executive Director of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and this map is kind of perfect visual for my question. I know the intent of the legislation around tier 3 was that no community was disproportionately impacted by tier 3. Have you done an analysis to sort of figure out what percentage of land under this new scheme per community and what that average is, and sort of the highs and lows? Because I'm seeing some fortunate communities with nothing mapped. And then I'm looking at our region, and we have, of course, I know through our own mapping, we have significant natural resources through especially Western Rutland County. How are you going to approach that element in deciding this mapping?
Yeah, thanks, Devin, for that question. It is an important part of the statute, so we're required to figure that out. The quick answer is no. We haven't done the analysis yet, so we will, but it felt premature to run the analysis until we had some sense of where the areas are, and they're still sort of malleable at this point. What I will tell you is that one of the ways that our board talked about doing that is this exclusion area of potential tier 1. Mm-hmm. So not tier 1 per se, but land use area designations that have the potential for any tier 1, the 4 that I mentioned on the slide. And so our thinking is that most every community is going to have one of those 4 types, if not more than one. And if we exclude all of them entirely from tier 3, we've provided a reasonable and fair way for every community to have an option to have tier 1 areas and not have tier 3 invalidate those. So that's one way that we're attempting to do it. And the other way is, yeah, to run the analysis and see what that looks like on both a county and potentially on a municipal level. What I want to stress is that even though the statute says we must do this, Mother Nature doesn't listen to the statute. And so if we're going to recognize the sensitivity of high elevation areas, of steep slopes at all, we are necessarily going to have a bit more of an impact in our mountainous regions of the state. So there's limits to how much we can make it equal and the same.
Yeah, I agree, and especially considering that sort of potential scheme you laid out of the trade-off with growth areas with these tier 3 areas, sort of conversely, the areas that may have more natural resources have very, very small village centers or no planned growth area, maybe only village centers. So that trade-off isn't probably going to be one-to-one that way. But I think you're right in that some of this is dictated by the landscape and the constraints that Vermont is known for.
Yeah, I will say also though that we're in charge of this, and we get to monkey with the GIS data and figure out how to slice it in different ways. If that's a concern, if we do the analysis and show it to you, of course, so you can see how concerned some of your communities should be. There might be ways that we can tweak the analysis to look at it, look at a different aspect of a resource that might be more equitable. I just don't want to make major promises because, again, Mother Nature doesn't care what we say. Let's stay in the room. Yes.
Hi, Joe Neal. I have a farm in Windham County. And off the top of your head, Alex, do you know what percentage of the state is under Act 250 currently?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't.
Everything but everything over 25,000 feet. I mean, 2,500 feet.
Well, but your question is, sorry, let me clarify your question. You're asking how much of the state has an Act 250 permit relevant to it now? Or are you asking how much of the state is subject to Act 250?
Well, it's a precursor to my main question, which is how big of a jump is this going to be? And are you actually going to have the ability to enforce it? Because there's this unspoken quote around Act 250 that I know of. That's, does anyone else know? Better to ask forgiveness than permission. And so what will you be able to do to enforce it?
Yeah, good question. So there will be a bit of a balance, but we don't know exactly which way it will tip. Because of the tier 1 areas, there are a lot of areas that are seeing the biggest developments that will no longer be getting Act 250 permits. And then there's the tier 3 areas that will create jurisdiction in these areas that will create the need for Act 250 permits that didn't require it previously. And how those will offset, we're not sure. It's the budget season right now. We're trying to anticipate what that means and what that means for our staffing and our budget. And it's very difficult. We don't have a great sense of that. So your question about will we have adequate staff and resources to enforce these new rules? I don't know. We have an enforcement team now. They are 2 people backed up by our attorneys that then support them when these enforcement cases go to court if they have to. So we already have a very small enforcement team. And it's not unlike what happens at the municipal level, right? It's not like there are zoning cops walking the beat looking for things. Typically, you hear about things because a neighbor has a complaint or somebody noticed something and just wants to know if a permit was necessary. And I don't envision that system is going to change. I think we'll be will be in that same system. But I don't have a good answer for you about whether this is going to overwhelm our ability to do enforcement. I don't think so, but we don't know for sure.
There's no provision within Act 181 to make up for the difference with such a jump in land management from the state.
No, the balance is with the tier one areas. That's really
Yeah.
where the balance was intended to aim. And the fact that the tier three areas will pick up additional permitting, I think it's our job as a program to come back to the legislature annually and say, this is what we're seeing. This is what we need for budgetary resources to implement what it is you gave us. And we do that every year. So that's the answer, I guess.
I mean, I would add though that these are areas that are development is centralized around our existing communities, right? We don't see most of our development in our rural areas and the tier one areas are also a small portion of the state, but potentially larger than this.
Yeah, it's a little hard to know yet.
It is
but
hard to
I
know,
think they may be
But they're
comparable.
kind of comparable, and we see more development in the tier 1A areas. So maybe that's where we're gonna see most. And so maybe the exemptions will let, we won't be overwhelmed if you consider that these are areas that probably are not subject to intense development pressures.
But if someone would want to start a farm in a tier 3 area,
Farming is exempt.
truly exempt. What if a farmer needs to make an access road? What if
Yes,
If it's for farming
also
purposes,
exempt
exempt.
roads, new roads, to serve farms and forestry uses are exempt,
Even over 800 feet.
even over 800 feet. Yes.
That was gonna be my.
We're gonna talk about that road rule at some point because it's a big deal, but we can stay on tier 3 as long as you let me. But yes, even with the road rule, farm and forest roads are exempt.
Just don't do anything commercial.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Craig. Who was responsible for and how was the public notified of these 4 public engagement meetings?
Right. So we did basic press release to all the media outlets throughout the state. We communicated with all the regional planning commissions and said, can you please get this out here to your municipalities? We have the website to the extent people are looking at that. Our working group is really one of the best mechanisms that we've had for getting the word out. They represent interests in a lot of different sectors. And so those 25 members, that was part of their charge, at least for me. It was like, can you please get this information out to all of your networks? That's why we're seeing a fair number of realtors at our meetings, because that representative did that work.
Well, I'm going to tell you, it's not working.
Okay.
I've spoken to 4 communities, the town halls, administrators, town clerks, and select boards who know not one thing about these meetings. Never heard of them. They don't even know about tier 3.
Gotcha.
If you need help, I will collect the emails for every single town in this state and give it to you, and you can send out a mass email, because there are a lot of people who are very angry that this is going on and they don't know anything about it. And that's based on conversations I've had for the last 3 days.
That's great feedback to have. So I don't need you to do that. You're welcome to do that if you like, but I would love to leverage your feedback and do better as we move forward through the fall. Part of the areas that we need to do more work is our outreach to both municipalities and landowners. So I think we can definitely springboard off of tonight and take the message that tier 3 exists.
Isn't it a little late now that the meetings are scheduled and no one knows about them?
Well, I hope someone knows about them because some
Well, a
people
few
are
people know
here.
about them, but the majority in my community have no idea this is going on.
Yeah.
And they're going to be affected by this and they don't know about it.
Yes. So
So, Are you gonna have another 4 engagement meetings coming up in the next month?
not in the next month, but we could certainly consider that later on. Absolutely. And that's my point, is that we're halfway through the process. We only just have a draft that's sort of worthy of anybody looking at, and there's more time. more time to have everybody be aware and have a chance to comment.
Well, I think it's important that people be fully notified and have an opportunity.
Yeah, I
So
hear you.
let me go on. On the map, I talked to you the other day. In the orange shaded critical resource areas, you described the tier 3 areas being placed along roads where they divide, let's say north to south or east
Yeah.
to west. And that where existing homes are, those areas are clear. So they look clear on the map.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're exempted. I just want to point out there are many homes that are existing that are not clear. And there are many habitat corridors that divide critical resource areas that are not labeled as tier 3. So having inspected the map and looked at it extensively in southern Vermont,
mhm,
I find it flawed. I don't find it consistent based on your explanation of why you chose those areas. So will those areas be added? Or are they just going to be forgiven, but other areas will be labeled tier 3?
yeah, it really depends on the areas in question. So, by no means is this a perfect product, and that's part of why we're here is to get feedback on how to make it better. So,
Right.
I don't want to commit to any particular area without looking at it and understanding, why it didn't end up on the map or why it is and shouldn't be.
Well, it just seems tier 3 is unevenly applied. And that's concerning.
So that's something we should address. Got
Okay,
it.
but going on with tier 3, something that is a major concern is that any kind of zoning is an encumbrance on land. Like a mortgage, a lien, a right of way. And I'm anticipating this to potentially adversely affect tier 3 properties with this encumbrance. Have you given that any thought to the negative impact it will have on the people who own on these properties? Average Vermonters, not big developers, not the super wealthy, just the average person who will be negatively affected, and their property will become less desirable because it has the scarlet letter of Act 250 attached to it.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Yes, we've been talking about that issue all the way through. And that's part of why when we initially looked at the resource areas that we could include in tier 3, the philosophy was we better make it pinpoint. We better make it focused so that it is really just the most important areas, because Act 250 and permitting in general does carry a burden. And what I want to stress is that, and I know you know this, but just, for everybody here, these tier 3 areas are not no build zones. These are not areas where you cannot do anything. These are areas where if you do want to do something, you go through a review process and make sure that the design works and that it's well done. And that's what most permit review processes are about. So I don't want to argue whether it's an encumbrance or not. I don't want to dispute that. But I do want to make sure everybody understands that these are not no build zones. These are not, you can't go there. These are, if you go there, you get a permit.
Okay. That process for somebody with the financial means or a developer, they'll just add it to the bottom line and move forward. But the majority of the people that will be negatively affected by this status of tier 3, it will be a major hardship and hurdle that will affect their property that they will not be able to get around or even take on.
I hear you.
And it's going to, there are many properties, I'm thinking of many people that I know in my immediate neighborhood that they're generational properties. And it's, so how will you make this equitable across the state? Because bottom line is, I understand your reasoning why you're picking and choosing where these tier 3 areas are. There's lots of science and ecology and all that behind that. But the bottom line is some people are being targeted and others are not. How do you address that?
Well, I would like to counter that one a little bit. No one's being targeted.
Yes, they are.
resource areas are being identified and those necessarily exist on the land and people own land. And so, yes, some properties have those resources and some don't, but we're not targeting people. That's not our intent with the
But
program.
people own the land.
Absolutely. And I
They
get
hold
that.
title to that land.
Yeah, I get that.
So it's people.
Sure.
Okay.
We're not targeting people though, just to be clear.
Well,
But to your question about, how are we trying to make it equitable? Those conversations have, I think, informed every single working group meeting that we've had, where folks have raised the exact same question of like, we do not want this state to be a place where only the wealthy get to play because they can afford to go through the permitting processes that are so cumbersome and expensive, the average Vermonter can't. I don't have a
so
good.
you're aware that that's the possibility,
We are
possible outcome.
we are very aware of that issue. I don't have a good answer, a neat and tidy answer for you as to how we're going to make sure that doesn't happen, except that we're aware of it and we're trying our hardest to make sure that the proper exemptions are in place, to make sure that it is a focused map and not something that's overreach. And I'll go a little further to say that part of the purpose for creating this board, this 5-member land use review board, as opposed to leaving it as a 3-member board of which only one, the chair, was a full-time member, was to reform the Act 250 program. And that goes beyond implementing these Act 181 provisions. Our program has not updated the rules that guide our program for over a decade. There's a lot of deferred maintenance within our program to sort of tune it up, make it easier, make it more efficient, make it more approachable for an average Vermonter to file an application and get a permit. We're committed to doing that work, but we're on a timeline to do this work first. So it's not a great answer, but I want to tell you as one board member of 5, that's my commitment, is that when we are largely done with this tier 3 work and various other aspects of 181, Act 181, largely next year, my attention will be laser focused on improving the overall program so that it is approachable to the average Vermonter, so that it doesn't cost tens of thousands of dollars to hire experts just to get through and to get an Act 250 permit. I think that we can do that. I think there are ways to do that. And I think the fact that we have a 5-member professional board that's charged with doing that gives us an opportunity. But I don't want to minimize your concern because, like I said, every working group meeting, the equity issue has come up for sure.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
could I just interrupt for a second? The recording stopped about 15 minutes ago.
It's
Yeah, it's still showing that it's going for us.
Okay,
You
thank
see-
you.
You see a clock ticking? Yes, and Annette, I think we're there. I'm gonna go online real quick and then we'll come back to the room. So Annette was just giving us a heads up. It looks like Michael Snide. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your last name, but go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Snade. I am president of Great Gulf Resort Residential and in Vermont, GG Killington. We are the developers of the project that's commonly known as Six Peaks Killington. It's about 1,095 acres at Killington, and we're a member of the Killington Investment Group that owns Killington Pico Ski Resort. I noticed that the Tier 3 mapping includes a headwater stream area in an already approved subdivision that has Act 250 approval. What is the effect of that?
That's a great question. My sense of that, and the rules don't address that, so that's an area that we likely need to add. But for properties that are already subject to an Act 250 permit, most development on those properties requires an amendment anyways. So I'm not sure that Tier 3 areas being mapped within those really matters. But you tell me if you have concerns about, there being a lower trigger for that development or the need for a permit amendment based on that.
Yeah, well, the one big concern that I have is that the green shaded area goes across like 6 lots and really renders 6 lots that were approved in the Act 250 application and the plan of subdivision renders them undevelopable.
Gotcha.
And
So again,
It's
our
not
draft.
clear how the green shading occurred.
Right, so 2 points there. Our draft currently does not address this concern. And so this is a great point, Michael. We should address it. My sense of it, and I'm just speaking as one board member, is that projects that are already approved should not be burdened or made impossible because of this tier 3 mapping. The whole point of tier 3 is to establish where there should be Act 250 jurisdiction. If there already is Act 250 jurisdiction, and there's already an approved project in those locations, we've already accomplished the aim.
But it's also, Michael, not an area that is undevelopable. It's an area that requires a permit review.
I see. Okay.
Right.
Well, we know that in this subdivision, the vertical elements, which is the homes, require further Act 250 involvement. So we already know that, and approval. I just was concerned about the issue of rendering lots undevelopable at all.
Now, I understand your concern. And I think, I talked through and around it, and Janet went right to the heart of it. Again, these tier 3 areas are meant to be areas where a permit would be required to ensure good design. They're not off limits. They're not undevelopable areas. And so again, we should address this in the rule. I really appreciate the comment, but I think our intent is, at least my intent with this, would be in that specific situation, that the tier 3 area would essentially have no import because the project is already under Act 250 and the jurisdiction is already there.
Okay, thank you. There's another case that I'd like to bring to your attention as well. It's a headwater stream area that is adjacent to our stormwater pond. Not stormwater pond, our snowmaking pond, I should say. And the primary source of water for that pond is a pipe that comes from the Woodward Reservoir. So I'm wondering why there would be a headwater stream adjacent to a pond that's fed from, 10 miles away.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would need to look at it with you specifically to be
Okay.
able to tease apart why that area was identified. But as I said, it's comprised of catchment areas that have 35% or greater slope, are above 1,200 feet of elevation, and have soils that don't infiltrate water when it rains, where water just runs right off. So presumably that area meets those criteria, but if there's an anomaly in the mapping of the streams, that's something we can look at.
Okay, great, thank you. And in terms of the habitat connectors, we also own some land down near the Pico Ski Resort on the east side along Route 4, and that is a significant habitat connector. How do we, in the future, will we just design the development so as to protect habitat corridors, et cetera? Or what does it mean to us going forward?
That's a really good question. So, yes, ultimately that's the aim, right? Is that these areas the design of development in these areas would help respect those resources. And that's the point of a permit, is to make sure that there is a design and that it holds up. With that said, tier 3 is a jurisdictional question. It's just a question of whether you need to be in a review process, the Act 250 review process. It doesn't actually set any new standards within that process. So the 10 review criteria that we use today are the same criteria that will be used for a property that's jurisdictional because there's development in a tier 3 area.
I see.
So, likely under criterion 8, Vermont Fish and Wildlife would come in and say, this is an important connector area, and let's try to make sure the development sort of allows that to continue in some fashion. But there is not a new criteria under tier 3 that's being implemented.
I see. Okay, thank you. That's it for my questions. Thank you very much. Really appreciated the answers.
No, sure. And this goes for Michael and everyone else. I am a bureaucrat. However, I am at your disposal. And so anyone who has a specific question about their property or their community, please call me or email me. Either way, I'm happy to talk with anybody. You don't have to come to a board meeting. I'm happy to sit with you, work through maps, all of that jazz. Yes,
The,
let's know your name again.
sir, Eric Laff, Rutland City. The map you showed with the two, bullseye zones of 800 feet, 2,000-foot circles. When you get down to the tweaks and the edits, that's the key where these shapes could be, should be bananas, boomerangs.
Right.
That's what's going to end up happening. And the other thing is, you know, it's very important that Vermont landowners are protected, but it's important to also remember that the natural resources are a shared thing. Not everyone, youth especially coming into the state, can afford to own property, own homes, whatever. So that's, I think, an important thing to be aware of.
Thanks.
Question online.
Okay, let's do one more in the room. Hi.
Shelley Lutz, volunteer for Pine Hill Partnership, do a lot of trail stuff. It sounds like Morrisville people asked you last night, but do you expect by draft 3, you'll have more information on trails other than existing trails are exempt?
Yes, for sure. So the folks with the Greenway Council reached out to me just the other day. And said, you know, we've been following, but it looks like it's time to comment. Can we meet? And so, yes, I'm meeting with them on Monday to talk about how we can improve this and be more deliberate about how we deal with trails.
Cool. Thank you.
Right. So we'll go back online. Samantha, go ahead.
Thanks, Alex. My question relates to the road rule, but it's pertinent, I think, to prior discussion tonight about map anomalies. So I appreciate so much adding the ability to view the road rule and tier 3 at the same time, which I've spent some time this week doing. And I am confused and hope maybe you can't explain tonight, and of course we can follow up any other time. But in looking at the road rule involved areas, I'm confused at how often it jumps a major state byway. Like it's like, for example, in the region we're discussing tonight, this happens many times over Route 4 and 7, and including at intersections of like 4 and 100, and I think 7 and 22. So my first question is, how does that apply when there's an existing road? Is it because it's not off of an existing structure, is my first question. And then my second, maybe just for the purpose of public information, could you explain how will all 10 criteria be a component of the review for a project triggered within tier 3? So for example, if it is triggered because of a wildlife corridor, is that the content of the permit review, or will they, for example, also have to go through an archaeological review or a, shoreland impact, etc.? Those are my two questions.
Good question. So Samantha, I think that the jumping that you're seeing in the mapping is related to the habitat connector portion of the tier 3 area. Is that the jumps that you're referring to?
No,
around
it's definitely the road. It's definitely the road rule, the white road rule reference layer.
Oh, okay. Because we do have some issues with large road corridors and habitat connectors, like not being hard to map in those areas. But I wasn't aware that the mapping that we were showing for the road rule had any kind of anomalies like that. So let me look into it and we can talk offline, and so you can help me understand what's going on that front. But the answer to your second question is easier. And that is, our working group actually did want the Act 250 review criteria, the 10 that I showed in a prior slide. We did want to reduce those for development in a tier 3 area. We thought, well, if you have to get a permit because you're in a wildlife corridor, probably you probably don't have to worry about aesthetics, or maybe you don't need to worry about your impact on local schools. But in the end, our attorneys informed us that the way statute is written, our board has the ability to make rules around how development in tier 3 areas would be jurisdictional and what would be in and what would be out. But we don't have the power to revise the actual Act 250 review criteria, the 10 criteria that are outlined in statute. If a project triggers jurisdiction, it has to be reviewed under all 10 criteria. And that's where we are at this point, given the statutory construction. So yes, a project that appears to have be in an area sensitive for wildlife still will have some historic and potentially archaeological findings, with regard to the appropriate criteria.
There will, just as there is now, the district commission's note, or if it's a minor, that a lot of the criteria aren't relevant to a particular development proposal. So you don't necessarily see that every development proposal triggers every single criterion.
Right. Our commissions will make findings on all of the 10 criteria, but in many cases, especially for small potato projects, the answer to a criteria on an application is essentially not applicable or no impact, and that's the end of it. Yes.
Maybe more of a statement than a question. Lyle Jepson, Executive Director of the Chamber of Economic Development here in the Rutland region. And I feel before I make my statement, I need to qualify. Lifelong Vermonter, come from a farm family, don't want algae blooms in Lake Champlain, want to protect Vermont like everybody else in this room. But I'm concerned, and I want to go back to the municipal and landowner communication piece, which I think was on your slide there. And I come at it from a recent issue that's happened in our region, which is the 3-acre rule, where people purchased property and they then were notified that they need to do remediation on their properties, and there's no grandfathering, and they just have to do what they're being asked to do. I worry that some of this may happen in the future to some people that have purchased properties, not knowing that they couldn't develop it and that couldn't do these types of things. So I want to go back to maybe what you were talking about, which is making sure everybody knows that this is happening. And I think you've done a great job getting out in front of this. It may take longer than you think to get out in front of everybody so that they all know. I might suggest, although it's a difficult and heavy lift, that there are 270 towns. Everybody gets a tax bill if they own a piece of property. There could be something in tax bills that are sent around to municipalities saying, and this is the website, you can go take a look. So if you want to look at where your property is and how it might be affected. I think it is important to make sure everybody knows, or as many people know as possible, that these things are happening. And it just goes back to maybe Michael Sneed and Great Gulf, when they purchased that property there, they purchased expecting that a certain thing was going to happen. And businesses need to see money coming back the other direction eventually after they've made a purchase. So how do we make sure everyone is adequately informed? And I know the planning commissions are working hard, you're working hard. How can we help as a chamber in economic development? Because at Vermonters, we're proud of our state. When we purchase something, we're proud of our property. And we want to protect that just like you do.
I think the chamber could be super helpful in that regard. Last night in Morrisville, there were a lot of folks that said, you need to send a piece of mail to every landowner who's got tier 3 mapped on their property. Why wouldn't you do that? I didn't commit to doing that, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's a good idea. It's a lot of mail, but getting the awareness of a business owner, especially one that, might not reside in that community, but owns the business there, and whether or not they get the mail from the state of Vermont that doesn't mean anything to them, that can be difficult. And I'm thinking the chamber could help us, with that kind of outreach, if you're willing.
Well, I'm not trying to not do that, but everybody gets a property tax bill from their town.
Yes, well, having worked for a town, I also know how difficult it is to get municipal town clerks and treasurers to insert anything additional into their tax bills. It's it'd probably be easier for us to just do our own mailings in that regard. But I appreciate the suggestion, and I'm open to any others that you might have, to help us get the word out. Any other thoughts in the room? Questions, comments?
I would,
Yes, go ahead.
just one relating back to
Just let us know your name.
Dakota Harvey, Rutland.
Thanks, Dakota.
Just relating back to the public awareness, I've talked to quite a few business owners around the Rutland community as a business owner myself. And a lot of people were unaware of this meeting tonight.
Gotcha.
I'm not saying it's, your fault or anything, but I think a lot of people would like to know about these meetings just to get an earful and see what you
Yeah.
guys are up to.
No, I
And-
appreciate that.
Yep, and going back to earlier, you had mentioned once this is done, you guys are gonna be working on more Act 250 reform. Is that gonna be, not to get off topic with the tier 3, but is that gonna start getting into like tier 2, I'm guessing, and start trying to make a little more like rural development, a little more affordable for folks putting in, small businesses, whether it's related to a farm or forestry or, construction or anything. Everybody needs, somebody that owns a small business, they have different needs. Some people might need a shop, like a bigger building to store their equipment in, or they might have a yard that they need to, there might be trucks going in and out. I think that would really help the rural economy in Vermont if we could make it a little easier
Right.
and a little more affordable for people to get, an Act 50 permit. But I was just kind of picking your brain. I know it's
So,
off topic a little.
Two things. One, the Act 181 did charge us with looking at tier 2 areas and providing the legislature with a report on various aspects of those. I'm not sure that report and what we're required to do in that report really gets after your question as much, but it's something we can be thinking about.
It does on accessory on farm business a little bit.
Okay,
We have to look at the accessory on farm business jurisdictional rubric and make recommendations on that. And I think the idea behind it was to clarify things for farmers and those who want commercial operations as part of their farming enterprise. But also, if you clarify something, it makes it easier. So, and perhaps to alleviate burdens on farm economies. So,
but I think, the kinds of commercial development that I'm hearing you talk about are not necessarily farms, and
Rural economy, something that isn't taking place in an urban environment.
right. And I know that there's been a lot of consternation about how jurisdiction works for commercial development with regard to parcel size. And that you could have a 12-acre lot and you want to set up a small business on it. And because you're on a 12-acre lot, you trigger Act 250 for that commercial use, regardless of how small your footprint is for that building. That's an area that, again, only as one of 5 board members, I would like to address when we get there, because that seems odd to me. Always has seemed odd to me. So I can't make promises, but I can tell you that it is our intent to take a look at some of the rules with the aim to make them easier, to make the process easier for small business owners, for Vermonters. And it doesn't always revolve around exemptions. Like, it's not just about let's add, this many more exemptions.
Yeah.
Sometimes it revolves around, how we make those jurisdictional decisions, and maybe most importantly, how we facilitate landowners and business people when they make an application. Like, is it a 2-page form or is it a 20-page form? Do you need a civil engineer because a layperson could just never fill out the form? or is it designed for a layperson? Those are some of the reforms that I'm hoping to pursue, in the years to come,
Yeah.
hopefully starting next year.
I agree. Just something to make it easier.
Yeah, we all recognize that as important as Act 250 has been for this state in making sure that we have a balance between an economy and a natural landscape that makes people want to stay or live here, we recognize that Act 250, creates angst. And that there's fear out there and in certain sectors about what it means to have to get an Act 250 permit. How much is going to cost? How long will it take? Is my neighbor going to appeal and get me tied up in court for 2 years? We recognize those fears, and we would like to do something about those. But it will take us some time to see the right way to address those, and to try to help Vermonters understand that the Act 250 program should be a positive force in this state. That was its original intent, and I think it does do that. But we need to do better, for sure. Okay, I don't see any hands online. Oh, now I do. Claudia, go ahead.
Yes, Claudia Maclo. I just have a question regarding the significant natural communities. Earlier, you mentioned that the Fish and Wildlife Department does the designation of the natural communities. If they missed some of these natural communities in a town, are they to be contacted, or would you be in charge?
That's a great question. You would want to talk to them directly, Vermont Fish and Wildlife.
Okay, great, thank you.
And again, to clarify something I said earlier, at least in this draft of the rules, we contemplate taking the information as it exists today, as everyone understands it today, with the mapping, trying to be as transparent as possible. And when the rules are finalized, we're going to dip that map in amber. And so as Vermont Fish and Wildlife maps additional significant natural communities of these very rare types, they will not automatically become Tier 3 areas. In fact, they will not become Tier 3 areas until a later date when we update the rules and update the mapping. We felt like, the rationale behind that, again, is to try to be fair and allow the public an opportunity to understand how these maps would change over time and not have it just happen automatically when new data becomes available. Dennis, go ahead.
Hi, Alex. Long time no see.
Yeah, good to hear you.
Quite a while back, you said something about in Tier 3, if you wanted to do something and say you needed to, you have to go through Act 250. If you had a large parcel, say 100 acres or something like that, and you were just wanting to do something on a minor part, you didn't have to have the whole parcel go through Act 250 and have that encumbrance on it forever. Is that correct?
That's right. That's the way we're envisioning this Tier 3 jurisdiction. Very focused.
Okay. And do you think anything like that will happen in Tier 2 or no?
I sure hope so. We actually have a provision in the Act 250 program right now that does give applicants the ability to make that request, that the jurisdiction would be limited to the project area and not the entire parcel. I'm not sure how many people really understand that option, but I would like to make that better known and codify it in some way. Because as I indicated before, just as one of 5 board members, I can't speak for the board, it sounds like a really logical way to address targeted jurisdiction rather than encumbrances of an entire property.
Yeah, and you said that that's a request and a request only. It might be denied by the board.
Yeah, actually, you're right. The district commissions have the ability to grant that, and it's discretionary on their part, but it is an option right now.
Mhm. Thanks. And on the 800-foot rule, you said that you can't do anything about that as a land use board. That is something the legislature wanted and it can't be changed.
Can't be changed by our board. It would require a legislative change, a change to statute if that road rule were wanting to be revised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just see some things in our town. I'm chair of the planning commission in Starksboro, and I see how that could affect. In fact, it won't affect a subdivision that happened a few years ago because it's already been permitted. But we have a case where we probably have 800 feet or more of road that's parallel to 116. So that the little development's only going to be probably 100, 150 feet from the center line of Route 116, but the road to access it, which will be parallel to 116, is probably more than 800 feet. And that just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, I hear you. We talked about that in some of our working group sessions, and well, I think it came up at our first public meeting on Tier 3 back in May, where someone made that exact point that having a trigger based on just the length of the road doesn't actually tell you how far into the woods that road is going. Because of just what you mentioned, sort of frontage parallel roads or switchbacks to deal with addressing slopes and that sort of thing. But that's the language that we have in the statute. So that's where we are. The intent of that provision was to try to make sure that interior forest areas got the level of review that they needed to help reduce the amount of fragmentation of forest by long driveways and long roads punched into the middle of the woods. But yeah, the way it was crafted, it's all about the length of the road and not how far into the woods it goes per se.
Right. And, on main roads, you can look out 800 feet pretty easily and not see a tree. So that, I can understand that on maybe class 3 or class 4 roads, but I don't know. Hopefully it can be addressed somehow. And I appreciate your time and I appreciate all your work, you, Alex, and the rest of your board. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
So is the map viewer a little misconceiving in that case? And if there was that 800-foot road parallel, this would show it would be out.
Yes. So when you look at the map viewer, which I encourage you all to do later tonight or this weekend, you'll see that the Tier 3 areas are shown, and then there are a few reference areas that are not Tier 3 but are on the map to help orient you. And one of them is just a very rough approximation of what this road rule jurisdictional provision would where it would apply. And all we did.
So it's assuming an 800
Yeah,
straight shot.
all we did was buffer out all the roads by 800 feet and show you those areas that are further than that distance away from a road. And so, yeah, it doesn't account for what Dennis is talking about when a road actually does a bunch of pitches and turns and you use up your 800 feet long before you get to that far into the woods. But it's the best we could to just sort of help you visualize it. And honestly, it has the potential to have a much larger impact on the need for Act 250 permits in this state than the Tier 3 areas will ever have. That the amount of the state that is more than 800 feet away from a road is very substantial. And if all of those areas are going to require an Act 250 permit for any development, that's a big deal.
Not any, same triggers that we.
Right. For non-exempt development. Yeah, so we recognize that, but that's a provision that is part of the law. And the best we can do is provide guidance on it so people can understand how we sort of interpret a road versus a driveway and those sorts of questions. Yes.
Ray Hall from Proctor. I'm a commercial realtor. I have been for 52 years. And sold my first piece of land over in West Haven when Act 250 was just 3 years old. So I have a particular interest in seeing that we don't further restrict and encumber properties unnecessarily. Obviously, when the government takes property by eminent domain, they have to compensate, some reasonable, or by some index, the owner of that property. I go back to the very first slide, I think that you showed, which had the purpose of Act 250. And two things jumped out at me relating to commercial development. The first sentence said to encourage appropriate economic development of lands. And another comment was to make it more efficient, the process more efficient. And I think Act 250 has failed miserably on both of those scores. So we should keep that original intent in mind anytime we apply well-intentioned preservation of wildlife. I was a biology minor in college. But and I do have just a few quick comments and questions that hopefully we can get through quickly. The Tier 3 designations should be limited to significant natural resource areas only. If we identify all resource areas, whether they're interconnected or not, but they aren't deemed to be significant, you are going to impact individual owners. I have always had to tell people when they buy a property with the intention of using it a certain way, that they are in all probability going to have to get an Act 250 permit. And a quick education of it with them. And they say, well, what's it going to cost me in time and money? And I say, well, most attorneys will advise you that it's probably going to take a minimum, even if it's a minor permit, it can take you a minimum of 3 months, 3 or 4 months. And if anybody appeals, it can take you 6 months. And till you get past all permit appeals periods. So again, I think we have to be careful to limit Tier 3 application to significant natural resources. Under the rules, the legislature identified only 6 areas for consideration: river corridors, headwater streams, habitat connectors, riparian rights, Class A waters, and natural communities. But the draft 2.1 that we reviewed lists 17. You pointed that out, 17.
17 were considered, yep.
Areas going well beyond the legislative intent. Under this draft, any construction larger than 200 feet, 200 square feet in a Tier 3 area would require an Act 250 permit. Now, will those permits be any one of those 3 categories, major, minor, or administrative, or do they all have to go through a full-blown Act 250 hearing?
Good question. They would be either minor or major if it was a new project. The administrative amendments are just for existing permits that need a tweak. So they'd be minor or major. And yeah, I mean, the rule doesn't contemplate a new procedure to make that determination. So it depends on the level of impact and the extent of the project as to whether it would need to go for be considered a major project and go to a public hearing or get a minor approval.
Okay, and I talked about the timing of a typical Act 250 permit, even a small one, but the cost is minimum. Someone's adding somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 in cost to their small development, and it becomes not feasible. So you don't create economic activity. It just isn't. If it isn't economically feasible, they may have bought the land intending to do this, but didn't buy it subject to an Act 250 permit, And so then they go through all this expense with engineers and attorneys and others. And those costs add up awfully quickly, especially when anybody can appeal, practically anybody can appeal it to the next level. And by the way, a 200 square foot structure can be a 13 by 15 foot small shed. Then down to, okay, with respect to private property rights, property owners within these zones would need an Act 250 permit for virtually any construction activity, because most construction is going to be more than 200 square feet. And I'm particularly concerned for the towns and the state, which is collecting taxes based on property values, that this is going to be an overlay of diminished value of property owners. Someone else spoke to this, several people spoke to this, diminished value in their properties right out of the gate. Because they'll say, well, I'm in the tier 3 area, that automatically is going to make certain things for the small owner, developer, someone without a lot of money, or even just middle class, being able to get a reasonable return on the property value. And when you do that, you diminish the taxable value across the state. By the time it all sugars off, probably within 5 years, you're going to find that there are a lot of properties that can be shown to be worth less because they're in tier 3.
Well, thanks, Ray, for your comments. We have about 10 minutes left. I just want to take a poll and see who else wants to make a comment or ask a question, and then we can sort of budget the last 10 minutes accordingly.
Do you not have a comment to his last statement? I'd like you to respond
About valuation.
about devaluation.
Yeah. I don't really have a canned response for that comment. I hear that a lot. I heard that a lot at the municipal level when zoning changes were suggested, and people would say, you're changing the zoning, so my property value is going to change. You're a realtor. You understand how properties are valued and what fair market price is and what the factors are that go into that. So I don't necessarily want to argue the point. But the way our development review system is set up at the local level with zoning regulations and subdivision regulations, at the state level with permits required for a wastewater system or impacts to a wetland, those are all factors that are in the mix, and Act 250 is one of them. So I hear what you're saying. I don't have a ready response.
Previously to this, Act 250 was a project-based trigger. So anyone who wanted to create a new business or build a facility for manufacturing or a subdivision for 100 homes, it would trigger that. And now Act 250 is targeted to some parcels owned by people and not others.
Right. And
so therefore, some property owners will be harmed and others will not. Big problem. Big problem of equity.
And that is the legislative construction of the act.
Well, I understand that.
We don't have the ability to turn our backs and say there will be no tier 3 areas because of that issue. That's not our option. Our option is to try to construct a rule and map areas as fairly and equitably as we can.
I understand
and as precisely as possible, so as not to have the overreach. But I don't know how to address that concern because it's not within our power to do so.
Well, I think I would just like you to acknowledge that that is the dilemma. That is what the legislature has done to some of the citizens of this state who own property, but not everyone. See, if you were overlaying tier 3 over the entire state, I would sit here and say, hey, I don't like it, but at least everyone has to face it. But why do I have to, but she doesn't?
Right.
Why does he have to, but she doesn't?
And again, all I can say to that is that it's largely driven by Mother Nature.
I,
Act
well,
250 has had location-based jurisdiction for a very long time. We just didn't call it that. Any development above 2,500 feet required an Act 250 permit. This is similar. This is similar in saying it's not just the areas above 2,500 feet that are truly sensitive and require some level of review. There are, in fact, other areas around the state that also deserve that level of consideration. And that's what we're trying to do, and is in as prescribed a manner as we can. But I'm not disputing what you're saying. And yes, it has real impact on real people, and because the landscape is owned by people.
okay,
So
so
hear
it's
you.
gonna take an act of the legislation to uh, to rescind or to
Yes.
adapt. Because I understand
We
you're doing
can't
your
do-
job based on what you
Yeah.
were given. You were saying, hey, this is what we're gonna do and this is your job. I get that. I get that. But I think to not acknowledge the elephant in the room.
But he
disingenuous.
has acknowledged it.
Well, I understand that. I
Yes.
understand that.
So,
He has,
Yes.
and I think that's important.
yes,
So I think
and.
with
working
proper
group has.
notification of the public going forward,
Gotcha. Yep, need to do more.
so that people know.
Yep.
So that they can put pressure on the legislature to change this Act 181, which will change your responsibilities. I understand that process.
Hear you. All right, we are just about out of time. I don't see any other hands. First of all, I want to thank you for coming, and I really appreciate you spending a couple hours of your evening with us. Please stay involved. Like I said, this is a half-baked cake, and we're going to make changes. We're going to try to address concerns as best we can. We're going to do more outreach. So stay with us if you can. And to reiterate, we're holding 2 more of these next week. You're welcome to join. And beyond that, we will be reconvening our working group to address the issues that we've heard, to try to refine the mapping, improve the draft, and we will be doing more outreach along the way. But look forward to, in the spring, a much hopefully better version of this rule and mapping, that we will do a more concerted public outreach again, so that you have an opportunity to speak throughout and closer to the finished product.
Alex, we have 5 more minutes, and I wonder if I should share our website and how you can access. I would appreciate that.
Yay, that's a great idea.
Okay, let me do that.
Well, she's looking that up. Did you miss Ken Stokes there in the upper left corner?
No, it's a red dot for
Oh,
recording.
No, that's the recording. Okay, I just lost my.
I can also get there, Janet. We'll,
Oh, okay.
we'll race and see who gets there faster.
Well, I just stopped.
We'll keep going.
Okay,
I gave you a head start.
let's see. Go back. And share. I got it. Okay. Those.
We have Michael Sneed.
And there. Michael's gone and no, Michael's still there, but you can see the Land Use Review Board website, right? It's act250.vermont.gov. And if you go to the Act 181 tab here and click on it, you can go down to Tier 3 rulemaking. You can also go to road construction. All of these things are Act 181 charges that we were given by the legislature. So if we click on Tier 3 rulemaking, we have some information, shows you the upcoming meetings. And what I want to find, Alex, is the draft rule, materials and resources. So here's the draft rule. And gotta click again. And it's not much. It's 5 pages. And it shows you what exemptions are contemplated. So not everything, Tier 3 is a trigger, but not every kind of proposal would trigger. Applicability, it's not very long. And it's, as Alex is saying, half-baked, but it's not very long. You can read it pretty quickly.
On the map.
That's,
On the
yeah,
map.
that's what I'm getting at. So the resource, map, tier 3 map viewer, that's what you want to look at. Here we are. And you have to understand and wish to continue.
You have to read this just at least a little bit.
Then,
Not
then,
now, but later.
and then, let's look at, I don't know, what, anybody want to pick a spot?
Grafton, Vermont.
Grafton. Isn't Grafton way far away from here?
That's southeast of here.
On the northern edge of
William
William
County.
County.
Okay,
Right there.
which one? Oh, okay, oh yeah, it's down there. Yeah, I know where Grafton is. Okay. So here's Grafton Village and a surrounding area. No, you know, if tier 3 bled into that, we wouldn't include it. It looks like it barely does. There are some habitat connectors up in this corner of Grafton. As Alex said, he needs to work on the modeling of that a little bit because
Can you overlay the orange? The critical resource. Orange and beige map?
The connectivity blocks?
Yes.
yeah,
So
but that's not tier 3, so I'm just showing people tier 3.
Well, I understand it isn't, but
Right.
tier 3 exists because of the orange
Right,
overlay.
and I'll show it in just a minute. I just want people to see what is tier 3 mapped in Grafton, since that's what people wanted to see. So, and that Alex, as you said, he needs to do a little work on, you know, cutting off some of these extensions of the proposed tier 3 area that aren't relevant to the actual crossing area.
yeah, so what you're seeing in Grafton is a collection of steep slope headwater stream areas in mint green. And then this in the northwest corner, these roads that divide large forest block habitats. And so, yes, on the right side of the screen, you're going to see a box with map layers. You can turn on and off these various layers. And at the bottom, there's one called reference areas, not tier 3. It starts as off because we don't want you to focus on that yet. But these are the highest priority forest blocks mapped by Vermont Fish and Wildlife, which, as was noted, Janet, please stop scrolling. This is what's driving the fact that that road is identified as a habitat connector because it's bisecting this highest priority orange block that is sort of running north-south. So the map is super helpful. You can zoom into your town, zoom into your neighborhood, your property. You can turn on and off the reference layers. You can turn on and off the various tier 3 areas if you want to focus on just one. And I encourage you to peruse it and then pick up the phone and call me with a question or help
What is
me.
your phone number?
802-480-1885.
Thank you, Mel.
Also available on the website.
Right.
And with that, Janet, I think we are at
We'll stop
8:01.
sharing.
So
Okay.
I want to say thanks again, and we will end. Brittany, did you have a parting comment before we bring off? Quick one.
I just wanted to ask if it would be possible to get a parcel layer on the map.
I think that,
Yeah. So if you zoom in far enough, the parcel lines I think show up because we're using a Vermont base map. But let me check on that, and if they don't, I will definitely have that added because that's a really important point.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
thank you, everybody. Gonna end the meeting.
Janice, thank you.
Thanks
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Janet, thank you too.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Very much for your hard work.
Spread the word. Show people how to use that viewer.
Find it. I couldn't get your microphone fast enough because I couldn't see all.
Well, you can call us or email us and we will explain how to find it. So,
Thank you for your time.
yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, great. How you doing?
All right.